and welcome to Lyte Talks. My name is Nakima Lyte, licensed clinical social worker, and I'm super excited that you have tuned in because we're going to be talking about navigating healthy boundaries part 2. Now, we have established the importance of boundaries within our relationships because it's quality over quantity, people. So if we have healthy boundaries, we have better quality relationships. Good morning! Okay. Today we're going to be going in a little bit more in depth with the types of boundaries that we often show up using in our relationships. So remember, boundaries are limits or rules that we set for ourselves and others within the relationships that we have. So today we're going to talk about 3 types of boundaries: rigid, porous, and healthy boundaries. And we're going to talk about how these types of boundaries impact or influence our relationship. Number 1 is rigid boundaries. Now, when we are operating in rigid boundaries, we often have a level of distance between ourselves and others that we're in relationship with. We might avoid deeper levels of intimacy, and I don't mean physical, I mean even emotional. In going deep within relationships, we might stay at the little shallow end where people don't have the ability to hurt us or harm us. And we are often doing this as a potential way for us to have protection against rejection, against hurt, against disappointment. When we're operating with these boundaries, we have a hard time also asking for help, right? Because we are closed off to others. Now, what does this look like within relationships? I call it sometimes like Alcatraz, right? Like there's a huge wall up and nobody gets in, but also I don't come out in terms of disclosing, sharing, or becoming more intimate with others. There's pros and cons to that, of course, but overall, there's a false sense of protection oftentimes where we feel like we can avoid hurt or become numb to others' offenses towards us. But in reality, sometimes we still are hurt, sometimes we still have pain caused by others, even though we're operating with rigid boundaries. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, we have porous boundaries, which is when we tend to be over involved in the relationships that we have, whether it be oversharing, whether it be having challenges with being able to set limits or say no to the desires or the requests of people, aka people pleasers. And the struggles with that could be sometimes even accepting or being open to disrespect or dishonoring within the relationships, sometimes even abuse. When operating with porous boundaries, we can be over involved in other people's problems. You see this a lot with family members or close friends that have porous boundaries, where whatever you feel, I feel, whatever I'm going through, you're going through. Now, that can feel like love and support, but there needs to be a clear line of where I end and you begin. That's the purpose of a boundary. So when looking at porous boundaries, I'm intertwined into someone else and they're intertwined with me in ways that are not helpful. Also, I can become very dependent upon the opinions of others, and I can fear rejection when not complying. So back to that challenge with being a people pleaser, if I'm overly concerned with how you think of me, what you want me to do, and I don't want to receive your rejection, then I'm going to comply to things that might not be the best for me. Third, we have healthy boundaries. Now, it's somewhere in the middle of those two, of course, right? Because rigid boundaries is on one end of the spectrum, porous boundaries on the other. Let's get some happy medium up there. So we have healthy boundaries. When we're operating with healthy boundaries, we have the ability to value our own opinion as well as others, but we are not going to be swayed by other people's requests or desires over us, meaning we don't compromise our values. We have the ability to say no, and we also have the ability to hear no. Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes I can say no, but when someone says no to me, I might have an adult tantrum. Okay? And being able to understand that healthy boundaries is I also have the ability to accept the limits of others. And when they say no to me, I can accept that and I don't equate it with them being mean or not loving. So, someone that has healthy boundaries has the ability to be grounded in both, being able to say no and receive no. They have the ability to communicate what their wants and their desires are within the relationship with clarity. Now, of course, if we're not there, don't be discouraged, okay? We're all progressing in this, but understanding that that's the goal, that we would be able to communicate with others we're in relationship with about where that property line is and when they've crossed it, being able to communicate that part too. Another aspect of healthy boundaries is appropriate sharing. Now, we talked about Alcatraz, right? Rigid boundaries, nothing's getting out, no sharing, no disclosing of personal information. Porous boundaries where they're oversharing, TMI, posting everything. Healthy boundaries in the middle is being able to understand that intimacy and sharing in good quality, safe relationships is important, but they know what to share, how much to share, with who to share, and what not to share as well. So, of course, most people have a mix and a variety of these three areas, and it could depend on the type of relationship. It could depend on the environment, right? Whether it be work, whether it be at home with family, whether it be with friends. But it's important to assess for us where we show up and how we show up in these three areas. And I remember speaking about this in my first video. The areas of our boundaries could be important to look at again, right? So we have time, we have our gifts and our talents, we have our finances and our resources, right? Like, what's your boundaries looking like with spending? What's your boundaries looking like with how much time you're giving for a person that's a vacuum and want to complain about their whole week? What's your boundaries also with your physical space personally, right? Don't touch me, don't come too close. But also your environment, right? I think of my home that I consider my sanctuary, the lighthouse. Not everyone comes to the home, but also if you're invited into the home, not everyone has the ability to come past certain rooms, right? No one's gonna be laying up in my bed. So there's boundaries within our environment as well. And for the sake of your mental health, there are boundaries in our emotional and our mental capacity. So these different areas, having rigid, porous, healthy boundaries, take an assessment of how these different areas can be showing up. I think something important to talk about too is just remember a boundary is an invisible property line, okay? So that means that someone else can't see it. And when they cross it, not if, when they cross it, because it happens. When people cross our boundaries, it's our responsibility to be able to express that the boundary has been crossed and what your expectations are for that person to get back on the other side. Now, hear me, that is not seamless all the time. Sometimes people are giving pushback where people attempt to manipulate, intimidate, and dominate. Can I say that again? They can manipulate you to be able to get what they want. They can attempt to intimidate you, again, to get what they want, and they can attempt to dominate you or the situation and attempt to get what they want. And these are aspects of control. We often operate like this in our relationships because of maladaptive ways of thinking or feeling, even as a result of our own traumatic experiences, where we want control over others and the situation. So remember, it's your responsibility to establish that property line, and when people are encroaching upon it, to be able to communicate that and communicate that with clarity. Now, I plan to do this next video on people pleasing because I think that it can be quite difficult, right? We've seen so many examples in the kingdom, in the Christian faith, where we will confuse Jesus being a door with Jesus being a doormat. No, Jesus had boundaries. Doors had the ability to give things open and shut, right? As a gatekeeper, he had the ability to have things come in and out. A doormat allows everything to be stepped on, and that's not biblical. Can I just say that? That's not biblical. So Christians need boundaries. Christians say no. Christians have the ability to put a perimeter in their relationships to be able to keep yourself safe, the other person, and the relationship having quality. So I love you so much. Make sure that you subscribe if you haven't already and share this video with somebody, okay? And go forth and shine your